Well, hope that's working now.
There's two ladies last week that were.
Is that going to be too much of a distraction? I don't know. It's proof to me that it's working in some level. David won. Okay, well, let me just start off by welcoming you all, that many of you that have traveled from close and far. And hopefully this is working on Ustream, and people out there are able to watch this as well. But a number of people close by, the Toronto area and so forth. But we do have some representatives from Minnesota, Hata. That's okay. Sorry, the camera can't see you. You know, someday we'll upgrade to multiple cameras or something like that. They.
No makeup, the hair's
Someone from Nova Scotia, kind of representing the East Coast, and Mary May. And it looks like Nova Scotia and Alberta just connected. Ruth from Alberta, kind of representing the West Coast. And you, Cameron. Now, were you born in the West Coast?
Yes.
Oh.
No, Medicine Hat, so nowhere near a coast.
pretty wet.
You're right.
You're right.
You can hardly say Alberta is the West Coast.
Well, close enough.
Anyway, so I'm honored, honestly, that a number of you have traveled from some distance and have come to join us here. So just to kind of get some things going here, we're going to bring Stephen into the mix about 11 o'clock, that kind of time frame, Eastern. And but for now, you get to get me for half a minute or so. And I guess what I wanted to chat about was this idea of connecting and the importance of connecting the body. And so a bit of background just kind of personally on that. It was a few months ago that I felt led to throw up an entry on Steve's weblog focused on kind of connecting the body in this area. And some of the people responded, the latecomers. Hello. Some people responded, and that's been good. We've been meeting on a quasi-regular basis, and getting to know one another, and kind of understanding where our callings are coming from, and what we have to bring to one another. And that's been really good for, I know, myself, and I hope it's been good for the other people that have been joining us in that. But really, the parts of the body that come together to create an effective body of Christ. And I think that's what I'm hoping I can share a bit of the vision on that. So a few resources on that front. Now actually, a bit more background though. A number of years ago, and I guess this is just kind of my own personal experience, having met with a few different groups in the past, and it's been almost like Father has brought together us with a certain number of people, and then almost inevitably when things looked like they were becoming effective in that, whether through prayer or the relationships were coming together in a way that it seemed like we could become spiritually effective, things seemed to de-evolve and fall apart. And it's almost like, and regardless of the source, the mechanics of how it worked, it's almost like there was some kind of opposition at play in terms of recognizing that there was an effectiveness coming together, and that's dangerous. And so this happened most recently, probably started about 4 years ago, when I was meeting with a group of guys out in the Newmarket area. And we started going through some books, just kind of some guys with a local church group. And we went through a book by a fellow by the name of John Eldridge called Wild at Heart. And it was a bunch of guys, so it kind of fit that mold. And he's very, John Eldridge within that book is very much talking about the heart of guys and the wild heart, and kind of encouraging guys to explore that part of themselves. And so that was good. And the group, probably took us about 6 months, 9 months to go through that book, and that was great. And then after that, we tried another book from John Eldridge called Waking the Dead, this book here. And we got into about chapter 4 of that book before the group completely dissolved, which was really surprising because we've been doing it for a few years, and it didn't happen over necessarily any one. It's not like it's not like everybody got upset with one another, or that nothing kind of dramatic happened in terms of group meltdown. One guy got married, one guy's job kind of took him out of the picture. It's just kind of like one by one through all these different, and it's like it just kind of dissolved away. And that was on about chapter 4 of this book, and I forget now what chapter 4 is about, but that's about how far we got into it, about a quarter into the book. And it might have even been a bit of heavy slogging through some of the information as well. Well, anyway, about a year later, 4 of us within that group kind of, we stayed in touch, and it's kind of like, that was really good what was going on there. Maybe we should try that again, even just the 4 of us, and see if we can. So we tried it again. Now, because a year had passed, we kind of started back at the book again, and we kind of started working through this book, Wild at Heart, again. We got to about chapter 4. And it died again. So that was interesting, and didn't think a whole lot of it at the time. Well, this book, Wild at Heart, I kept. We've had a few different moves over time, but this book and a number of other books haven't moved that far away from, either the box or whatever. As you're moving from place to place. Finally got by my my bedside area again, and pulled it out, and I put it on my bedside, and it was kind of like Father was like, you need to keep reading through that. So eventually I got back to it and started reading through it, and pushed through. I actually started at the beginning again, and got through chapter 4 and kept going. And as I got through it, started to get a better sense as to what was going on, because a little later on in the book here, he starts dealing with spiritual warfare and these kinds of topics, and topics about how as the body comes together as a group of people that are meeting and supporting one another, how effective that can be. And I'm thinking, now I kind of understand maybe why we kept getting taken out about chapter 4. Now that group has never really come back together again, but it really inspired me as to where he was going with this book, and maybe why for some reason we were being derailed in. So I would encourage you, if you haven't read this yet, to go through it. And the little group of us kind of started to go through it again, and we haven't been terribly successful at that as a group yet either, although I've been crunching back through it again. And whether or not we get through it as a group, I'm not too sure matters as much as just the background information that he provides in here about spiritual warfare and about the dynamics of a group kind of within that context. So I'd encourage you to pick that up and check that out.
E-L-D-R-I-D-G-E.
John Eldredgge.
Oh, D-R-E.
Waking the Dead. I put a link to it on the weblog with like an Amazon link there. So
Oh, on your home website?
on the blog entry on Stephen's site, in the little reading list that I put there, it is there as well.
Wow, Stevens. Okay, thank you.
Of course, in terms, from a biblical reference point of view, I mean, a lot of these things, of course, we know. But just to reference Ecclesiastes 4:12, though one may be overpowered, two can defend themselves. A cord of 3 strands is not easily broken. Now, we've heard that a number of times, I'm sure. But just bringing that truth to the picture, that there's strength when we come together in that way. Now, part of what he's referring to as well, and maybe even just a bit of reference from some of what we know, having read or listened to Stephen in the past, he's talked a number of times about kind of a wilderness experience. And I know for many of us, and this is part of the background as well, as we've been doing the Bible Study Storehouse, oftentimes we will get a phone call, people placing an order or whatever. But oftentimes the conversation goes to, is there anyone in my area? I love people's stories, and oftentimes we get people's stories, this is where I've been, and I used to go to this church, and I'm not going to this church now for whatever reason, and I'm here all alone. I'm out here, and I'm either reading Steve's stuff or a number of other people's materials, and it's been great, but I'm here alone. Do you know anyone in my area? And up to this point, my answer typically has been, actually, no. I really don't know of anyone, kind of in your area, or we haven't got kind of an organized way of keeping track of that. Hopefully, that's going to come out of this in some way or another, whether it's some kind of listing, or hopefully people that are listening out there can put on the Facebook page kind of where they are, and as we start connecting people together, that people can start making those connections. But that's been some of the other background, is just that coming from people saying, hey, I love to, meet with like-minded and share and so forth, and do you know anybody out there? And that goes back to, of course, the three strands coming together. Now, going back to the wilderness, that wilderness experience, Stephen has a little booklet called The Purpose of the Wilderness. Anybody read it? Purpose of the Wilderness? It's been a while since I've read that little booklet, but if I recall correctly, part of his idea in The Purpose of the Wilderness is that God takes us out to the wilderness to train us. And of course, the biblical background to that, the Israelites going out into the wilderness, almost everybody gets taken to the wilderness. Jesus goes to the wilderness, John goes to the wilderness. Seems everybody gets a wilderness experience of some sort. And it's typically for training, typically to be set apart, kind of a place where I can get God can kind of get us alone and get our attention. And I know some people have been doing some fasting. Sometimes there isn't a whole lot of food. All those kinds of metaphors are going on. And that seems to be a really good experience for training. We get away from the distractions. We get to hear God's voice directly, or maybe it's the materials that reading, whatever, has come our way to teach us. So the wilderness experience is really good for that. But oftentimes, I think that some people kind of get stuck in the wilderness. And they get taken out to the wilderness. That might be, having left the church they were going to, or, whatever the group might be. And they get out there, and they have a hard time finding their way back, or maybe are afraid to come back, or whatever that experience might be for themselves. The point is that the wilderness is a great place to learn, but it can be really difficult if you're going to fight, or if you're looking for support in the wilderness. That can be really difficult. And that wilderness experience, everyone gets called back out of the wilderness. They get called back in some way or another, whether it's back to a local church. I remember when we were going through this years ago, I always had the sense that in some way or another, we're going to get called back. It might not necessarily be to the church that we were going to initially, that we left, but we're going to be called back to be involved in some way. And we're still trying to figure that out. That takes different forms as you kind of come back. I think this is part of the form for us has been kind of connecting with a local church, and we're doing that, with the kids and so forth. But so that just kind of works for each person. Part of it was even this guys group that I was hanging out with. That was part of kind of Father bringing us back to some kind of out of the wilderness. Point is, wilderness is a great place for learning, but not a great place if you're looking to fight or looking for support or something. That comes through other people surrounding you, and he really brings that out in this book here, Waking the Dead. Just going through my notes here. So, So another book I want to talk about then that has kind of inspired me in terms of this place here. A little book called Tribes from a fellow by the name of Seth Godin. And I came across this book and watched a video of this guy probably 6 to 9 months ago. And part of his message is that everyone, especially where we are now with kind of internet, social media, and so forth, but really the call that he's kind of throwing out there is that everyone can be a leader. And it kind of goes back to this idea then of people scattered all over the country, and ultimately, if the body's going to connect, the pieces have to come together, but there's always somebody that kind of takes a leadership role in doing that. There's some joint or there's some part of the body that kind of, there's the wrist that pulls the fingers together, however you want to use the analogy. And so his call really is saying that with the technology we have out there, everyone is capable and everyone has the ability to be a leader in some form. And so check out his it's not a very big book, it's actually a fairly easy read too. And check that out. Some of his points there, just a little bit of a summary. He says here, a tribe. So what is a tribe? Because it sounds, we're not talking about the 12 tribes necessarily here, just, from point of confusion. His point here is a tribe is any group or people, small or large, who are connected to one another, a leader and an idea. The internet has eliminated the barriers of geography, cost, time, and those blogs and social networking sites are helping existing tribes get bigger. Before, in times past, whether it was a mailing list or people writing letters, or you had to gather together, people to form a church, or, whatever those mechanisms were in the past, in terms of pulling together people in some kind of cohesive group, that really has changed in this internet culture that we find ourselves in now. And it's actually made it a whole lot easier and a whole lot more empowering for anyone, wherever you are, whether you be in Alberta or Nova Scotia or Minnesota, although Minnesota's probably fairly well served, isn't it?
I'm about 26 miles from Steve.
There you are. So wherever people may be, Windsor, London, Australia, the UK, people are scattered all over the place. And it really is about kind of an opportunity for people to connect together and someone to take a leadership opportunity in that space and just, take what they've learned. And I guess that's another point too. A lot of us have probably been being taught for a long time. I know we were discussing last night, kind of part of the question when you're meeting people is, okay, so how did you come into this, and how long have you been reading this stuff or whatever. I know for ourselves it's probably been since we figured around 98, 99, and we've been learning some of this stuff for a long time. Some others not so long. But it seems to me that that after having learned for a long time, there's almost a bit of responsibility to dispense that out again and take what we've learned and share with others. Don't want to get fat on too much good meat. So, another piece of the puzzle then, and so I recommended Stephen's book Wars of the Lord as a read, and I did a little review on Steve's website. He hasn't told me, I haven't gotten any bad reviews about my review, so I hope it was all okay. If you haven't read it, 50 chapters, interesting choice of numbers, of stories of spiritual warfare that he's experienced. And I guess this kind of caught my attention from a few points of view, but also from the point of view of course, he's writing it very much from his perspective, but there's no doubt that he's talking about different people that have kind of come in and out of his life, and the parts of the body that are coming together to either provide double witness or prayer support or whatever it has been through that journey. And so a good almost background and coverage in that process of spiritual warfare. And I'm kind of hoping Stephen's going to talk a bit more about that. We can see what the questions come out, or even questions from yourself. Now, connecting the parts of the body then. We found it interesting, and this caught my attention then last night. So we're in the Toronto area, and so listening to the news last night, and so I copied this off of the CBC website. CBC in Canada is the kind of one of the national broadcasters here. So cbc.ca/news is where the news is. Anyway, so I pulled this from there, and it said police west of Toronto say they have found 2 severed hands in their search for body parts in a Mississauga river where a head and foot had previously been discovered. Sounds rather gruesome, but when I heard this, I thought, interesting, they're finding body parts. And I apologize for the gruesomeness of this. So if you can kind of step away from that for a minute, what caught my attention was body parts are coming together. And I'm remembering, okay, so we're doing something here about connecting the body. What's going on with that? Quote, the likelihood of it being the same person is, common sense-wise, probably pretty high, said Sergeant Peter Brandwood of Peel Regional Police, the force responsible for that area that includes Mississauga, which is the town that this is happening. He said during a mid-afternoon news conference that one hand was found near the foot, but downstream on the Credit River, while the other hand was a considerable distance downstream, though he couldn't say specifically how far. Both hands, a left and right hand, were found early Friday afternoon. So again, I apologize for the gruesomeness of it, but if it's possible to see past the gruesomeness of it, I read there and I heard earlier on that they had found both the left hand and right hand. And if you may recall, if I remember correctly, right hand is mercy and left hand is law. And it seems that they have found both the left hand and the right hand. And a few times they've been specific about saying, find the left hand and the right hand. What I didn't recognize until I read this last night was that they found it on the Credit River. And of course, with what we've been reading about financial and potential, all the rest of that, of course, rivers, and Stephen has talked about the River Euphrates going under Babylon, river being tied in with liquidity, and it's the Credit River. Go figure. What does this have to do with Babylon falling and finding body parts? Is there something about the fact that connecting the body has to do with the fall of Babylon? Is that what this is about? Interesting stuff. Of course, this also got us thinking then about a number of months ago, actually it was May 29th in Montreal. Unfortunately, we're all too busy, myself included, but it twigged my interest back in May about how Montreal had seemed to have been on the news an awful lot. It started with the protests in Montreal, the student protests against tuitions, and the ongoing night after night after night protesting the government. And then there was a bombing in the subway. A bomb went off there. And then shortly after, we hear about these body parts that they're finding. They found, and of course they weren't finding them in a location. They were being scattered all across the country. They were being mailed. If I remember correctly, some went to West Coast, some went to East. I didn't have written down here exactly what it was, but I know that they sent one body part to the political offices. It was it seemed to be this idea that the body parts were being scattered all over the place, all over Canada. And now in Mississauga, they seem to be collecting body parts. Anyway, those are some of the things I wanted to share. The importance, the value of connecting the body, and the strength that comes from that. This idea that while many of us have been scattered, as it were, over the past number of years, many of us experienced the left hand of fellowship. Some have experienced the left foot, and out whatever door that you may have been kicked out of, whatever the case may be. Everybody has a story, but there seems to be a scattering of many people as they have been learning, and God's been directing them that way. And maybe the time for scattering, in a lot of ways, is maybe not coming to an end because everyone's on their own path, but maybe it's about coming together and the body parts coming together to become truly effective in that way. And hopefully that's going to happen. And Father will make that happen. I think we're starting to see signs of that. And so again, I'm honored and blessed that you have joined us here, and take the opportunity to kind of get to know one another, and these parts of the country and that kind of thing come together. And hopefully online, as people are out there, the Facebook page, the links are on the main page at BibleStudyStorehouse.com/connecting. That's where all the core information is, including the link to the Facebook page, and questions can be put on there. I think that's about what I had to share. Anyone have anything, want to keep this interactive? Anyone have anything that they want to add into that mix?
Well, we had a tragedy in Minnesota.
Do you mind coming up here so that everybody can see you? You're beautiful, Hada. To the microphone.
Well, we had, Steve also related a gruesome incident in Minnesota. No, it was Wisconsin. A couple was separated, and he was in the Dakotas, and he came back, and his wife was working, and he said, I want to see the kids. I think Stephen put a posting on it, and it really did happen. And it reminded me of that when you were sharing that he went to the woman's home and dismissed the babysitter and slit the three daughters' throats and called the wife and said, you can come home now, the kids are dead. So Stephen, I thought, did an excellent job, just like you did, Thom, of it sounds gruesome, but his name in German meant, it's phenomenal. I'm sure he did a posting on it. And you took a story that you're hearing, even whether it's local or globally, and you get the higher understanding. I needed it because most of us don't want to hear a gruesome thing. But we can just reread the link because the German name meant something, and it sounds really gross, but it is exactly what you're sharing. That there's a higher understanding and meaning. Does that make sense? So we're coming together. This is beautiful.
Good. Anyone else? Come on, don't be shy. Nobody else? Okay, cool. Well, let's take a break then, and we'll rejoin this at around 11 o'clock or something like that, and hopefully we can figure out the technology to bring Steve into the mix and go from there. Cool.
That was very